What is up, you guys? It's Monty, and today I'm back again once again with another video. I'm gonna try and keep this brief because I just spent the last 13 minutes talking. Um, didn't like where I went with it, so decided that we're just gonna come in here. We're gonna try it again, and I only have like 17 minutes because I'm currently trying to make my breakfast, and so I have some rice going, and I need to be done recording by the time my rice is done cooking. So I just finished reading The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I say just, I finished this book yesterday. It's been like probably a good 12-ish hours almost coming up on that. So I've had some time to think about it and to reflect on why I gave this book 2 stars. And I do want to give Ashley Winstead some props. I think that Ashley Winstead wrote some beautiful sentences. I think that she really knows how to write a story. I think she knows how to make a book engaging, even though what she is writing I don't think is good. Like objectively, like just looking at, her writing quality, I think that it's fine. Like it's a good time. I never was to the point where I didn't want to read. So that's a good sign, Like we're in it, we're having a good time. I wasn't reading the book out of like a sense of hate, or I wanted to come on to the internet and drag it. And at first I was really here for it. You put the word housewife in a title and odds are I'm going to enjoy it. I like a good, I like a housewife. I like a housewife character. I like, suburban secrets, even though I knew this wasn't a suburban secrets book, but like that's my vibe. So even though I knew I wasn't going to get Suburban Secrets, it was going to be something a little bit larger in scope. I was drawn to it. And the first part of the book, it was getting me. We were following Shay. Shay is a Texas housewife. She was living her best, Texas housewife fantasy. She was, I think she was like gardening at one point, listening to her true crime podcast. It was very much giving relatable girl. But we soon discover that the podcast that she listens to religiously is run by her high school friend. And the episode that the book starts on is him talking about the apparent suicide of one of Shay's college roommates. And so, because she has such a personal connection to this, it was her roommate that died, and it's this podcast that's run by her friend. She decides to use because she's a housewife, and her spouse, her husband, I think is like a venture capitalist. That's what it was giving. He was like investing in people. And so she just like decides to go on a whim back to upstate New York, and she's going to get herself involved in the case. I'm never really, this is the part where I feel like I'm different than a lot of booktube, but I don't like books where our main character is playing investigator when they're not an investigator. Like I'm more than willing to follow a lawyer or like a private investigator or a detective, a police person, um, doing their job and like investigating. And I understand that there's nothing like inherently special about a police person investigating, because if life has shown us anything, it's that like the police don't do investigations very well. So like, what are they like? They're not special. But like this regular just like Texas house mom, well, she's not a mom, she has no children, like this Texas housewife and this podcast person going undercover and like doing things, that didn't, it doesn't really butter my biscuit. So I wasn't investigating that aspect of the story, but I was willing to give it a shot. This also, I think, proved my theory. I had this theory that I don't really know how valid it is, but when a new release like this one is, and it's by, I would say Ashley Winstead is a pretty popular author, both audiobook copies of this book were available, and it's been out for less than 2 weeks. This book came out on August 16th. So that's kind of a red flag. It's becoming a red flag for me. I don't care if it's not valid. I don't care if it's giving like an elitist thing or whatever. I definitely think that a new release book should have some kind of wait list at the library. Shouldn't shouldn't just be able to waltz in, or at least on, on the Libby app. Like in person, sure, but the in person on the app, I don't know. But I was like, I'm going to keep listening. I'm going to keep going. And we do get there. We do get them investigating. Their investigation, we learn more about Shay's time in university, in how she met her roommates. And it deals a lot with domestic violence. We get a lot of rape. We get a lot of just like very dubious consent. We get a lot of just like violence, just a lot of violence against women. Um, And you hate to see it. You really do hate to see it. And it wasn't anything that I felt was adding to the narrative. It felt like it was giving justification for what Ashley Winstead wanted to do. It was supposed to help you sympathize with Shay and to like understand her motivations for things. And it did make me understand her motivations for everything. But a lot of the violence that was depicted in this book, it just felt very hollow. And at some points it felt borderlining. It felt like it was crossing from like a real serious depiction into a kind of comedy sketch, and it just wasn't working. It wasn't working. It was kind of making me look at it very sideways, just like it felt like it was making fun of this kind of a situation more than it was like shedding a light, and it felt very opportunistic in a way that I didn't quite appreciate, especially as the book got on further into like the third act. So their investigation into Shay's friend's death leads them to a sex cult situation that we find out Shay had some prior experience with. This is all in the blurb, I believe, or at least in how people have pitched the book. So I won't go too far past that, but we do know that Shay had a connection to this cult in the past, and she is when it was a much smaller, much more intimate thing, and now she is seeing how this has evolved beyond what it was when she was there. And I felt that a lot of the scenes with the cult that was at the center of this investigation were a little bit foolish. Like, these were the parts of the book that felt a little bit, what are we doing here? It did feel like, again, like it was a comedically enhanced version. It was like a hyperbolic version. No, not even hyperbolic, because all of the things that were happening, the violence that was being enacted there, it definitely felt like something you could read about in a nonfiction book about, or a memoir about someone's experience in a cult. But it just wasn't giving. It felt very hollow. It felt very almost performative in a way. It felt very like, look what I'm putting my characters through. It felt very like stock standard, what you would expect from a good for her novel. Like, we have to show all of this violence and this degradation and our main character having gone through this, so at the end of the book we can give her this good for her moment, because she has to earn the good for her moment. And so we have to see this just like gratuitous violence depicted. Part of her investigation into this little cult definitely includes her like running away routinely. The way that this woman was able to come and go, and everything the sex cult was like looking at her funny, but she kept coming back and no one was like really calling her on it until the third act. Then we had these moments where homegirl had this like little recorder stuffed in her mouth and her bra, just like muffling the audio and the sound, but it was all perfectly crisp and clear for the third act. There were some moments in this book that felt, again, it felt very cartoonish, it felt so cartoonish because of the way that I could tell that if you were reading the book, it would look like this. You would have all kinds of tabs and highlighting, and you would have like really gone in. But when you take a step back away from how Winstead was able to actually construct the narrative, like, you know, on a sentence level, on a paragraph level, on the way that she would use certain phrases together, like, she was really painting a picture. She knew what she was doing with the pen. Like, Ashley Winstead, you can say a lot about her books. You can say a lot. They're not good, but they are well written, which is, it's just the same juxtaposition maybe that, like, okay, we're using this like really serious thing, but it's coming off like I'm supposed to be laughing. Like, people on Goodreads have said that this is like some of the most, like, the darkest book they've ever read. And I don't think that it is. Like, dark stuff happens, you know, there's violence, there's rape, there's dubious consensual non-consent that I would just say is rape. There's a lot of, there's some knife play, there's suicide is a major component of the story, because obviously we're investigating whether this was a suicide or if it was a murder. And how in the past another one of Shay's roommates also committed suicide, so that's a recurring theme in the book. Shay's mother was domestically abused, and that comes up over the course of the narrative. Like, there is a lot of heavy topics, but again, it's in this way that felt very hollow. And I don't know, it just didn't work. It felt like it was trying a little too hard to be this like literary thing. And I don't think that it helped that I had just finished reading Yes Daddy by Jonathan Parks Ramage, because Yes Daddy and this book feel like they're not like completely identical. If they're twins, they're fraternal. But I feel like they're more cousins. Like, they are in the same family of book, and neither one of them worked for me. And when I was filming the first take of this video, I also would add First Become Ashes to this mix. So if First Become Ashes and Yes Daddy had a baby, it would kind of be The Last Housewife. And I feel like those are very niche books. I haven't seen a lot of people talk about Yes Daddy or First Become Ashes. And I do think that if you liked The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead, you would probably enjoy First Become Ashes and Yes Daddy. I think you would get something out of them that I simply didn't get. But I do think that of the three, The Last Housewife is probably the best written, but all three of them have a commonality that I don't vibe with. So this wasn't for me, but if it was, I love that for you. And if it was for you, those are two books I think you should check out. If you've read The Last Housewife, feel free to let me know down below in the comments. I would love to have a conversation about this book because I think that there's a lot to talk about. But I'm running up on like 15 minutes, so my rice is about to be done cooking and I don't want to burn it. So thanks for coming here. I'll see you guys again on Saturday with some reading sprints. But until then, and until next time, bye.